1, a date which will live in infamy.
All right, that date that lives in infamy was 80 years ago when Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Good evening. Good Tuesday evening to you. Welcome to Spicer & Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsay Keith. Well, Sean, as you know, as a result of Pearl Harbor, more than 2,400 Americans were killed and more than 1,000 were wounded. And in the days after that attack, Congress declared war and the United States entered into World War II.
Yeah, Lindsay, so much can be taken away from that time in our history and everything that happened, especially the importance of having adequate military resources to defend ourselves and, frankly, have the intelligence needed to prevent an attack.
Absolutely. And speaking of the military and resources, there are escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine as satellite images show the buildup of Russian armed forces at strategic locations in western Russia near the Ukrainian border. And President Biden spoke on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier today for 2 hours, Sean.
Yeah. The White House released a readout, but here are some of the big takeaways, if you will, from that call, according to the White House. The U.S. voiced concern about Russia's escalation and those forces that you mentioned surrounding Ukraine on the border. And Biden said that the U.S. and our allies, the European allies, would respond with strong economic and what he calls other measures in the event of military escalation by Russia into Ukraine. And Biden also said he called for de-escalation and a return to diplomacy.
Well, we've also learned that Biden plans to speak with the president of Ukraine this Thursday. The big question here on our hands tonight is, has Biden done enough to deter Putin, and does Russia take President Biden and this administration seriously?
Yeah, a lot to break down. We're going to speak with a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Texas Congressman August Pfluger, in just a moment. But first, we kick things off with our national security company. Joining us is former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, and U.S. Air Force Brigadier General and United States Deputy Military Representatives to NATO, Blaine Holt. Gentlemen, good to see you. Ambassador, I want to start with you. The takeaway, in my mind at least, from Pearl Harbor is that we got caught flat-footed. 80 years later, though, we have this botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, leaving millions of dollars in military weaponry in the hands of people who are our enemies. And you've got one side of the political aisle here right now that's not giving the military the resources or support it needs. So I guess my question, generally speaking, is, do you think our country is setting itself up for another Pearl Harbor?
Well, at this point in time, I still have a great deal of confidence in our military. I think we have the most powerful and capable military on earth, and I think they could take on any challenge that is assigned to them. The worry that I have is, what is the decision-making that goes toward that? Do we have the will to defend our interests militarily if needed? And this is what I think Putin is questioning after our withdrawal from Afghanistan. He saw the U.S. leave. He saw us abandon our allies. He saw the lack of consultation. He saw Americans stranded in Afghanistan. And I think that has caused Putin to feel that the administration is not prepared to use military force. And that's what I think he is actually testing in Ukraine, among other things. He's seeing, does the U.S. have the resolve now?
Well, General Holt, let me ask you about that, because there's such a substantial presence along the Ukraine border. People say up to 150,000 troops. Last time Russia tried this was under the Obama administration, 2014. The U.S. didn't do anything. Even MSNBC is reporting that the White House knows it's had missteps when it comes to Russia. Listen to this.
Does the White House accept that they've been a little too passive with Putin?
Well, I think privately they accept that there have been some missteps when it comes to the foreign policy strategy here.
And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that Biden, he made it clear that he is prepared to do things that the Obama administration wasn't in 2014. But when I think about it, how can Russia take this administration seriously when Biden didn't hold them accountable on Nord Stream 2 and other things? Do you think that they're going to take this conversation seriously, General?
So Russia senses weakness, and this is very formulaic. If we go back to 2014, we can really trace the attack on Crimea and taking Crimea quite easily from the imaginary red lines that were set with regard to chem warfare use in Syria. And then if you blast forward today, it's very largely the same national security team that's intact. Here we see we start the administration with a very weak display with China. We move to arguably our nation's greatest military disaster coming out of Afghanistan, and really shaking the world as to whether the United States will stand by her partners and allies, setting the table for Russia to once again re-examine the Ukraine equation. But I would remind everybody that 175,000 forces sitting on Ukraine's border can do a lot more than just take the country of Ukraine. And we're already seeing problems on the Belarusian border with Poland and the Russian preferred hybrid warfare that's existing up there. There could be a lot greater design here than meets the eye. And two military exercises in the last 6 months that are less than 6,000 people from the Allies and NATO does not show resolve. And then hanging in the backdrop the entire time, you have an administration that may well be conflicted with regard to Ukraine when we look at the Hunter Biden laptop and the Burisma interactivity between that and the president's son.
So, Ambassador, I want to pick up on what the general is saying. If Putin says, you know what, I'm going to test you, I'm going to go further into Ukraine, what do you think the U.S. is willing to do militarily? Are we willing to either on our own or as part of some kind of NATO force to invoke Article 5? Even though Ukraine's not a member, I get that. But does NATO have a role here? Does the U.S. military have a role here? Because this is a big deal. If we didn't do anything in Crimea, if we allow them to go into Ukraine, I got to think China's looking over its rear view and saying, all right, Taiwan's looking pretty good now, too.
Right. And I think that's an apt parallel that Ukraine is probably Putin's Taiwan. And I think we need to think of it in terms of what everybody is reading from these signals. In terms of NATO, so first off, I think there is no question that the United States has a clear obligation and a capability to defend those who are members of NATO, defend our allies. And the administration can even now be sending more forces forward deployed to NATO countries so that we deter Putin from attacking our NATO allies. But the immediate issue here is Ukraine, which is not a NATO ally. We don't have an obligation to defend Ukraine, but we have an interest in Ukraine's security. And we have a country that probably would be loath to see U.S. forces directly engage with Russian forces over Ukraine. So I think what you will see the administration doing is continuing and escalating security assistance to Ukraine. If you remember, the Obama administration banned lethal arms for Ukraine. The Trump administration reversed that and provided lethal arms. The Biden administration has continued that policy and provided lethal equipment. And I think now is the time that we can expect both more deployments to NATO countries and increasing the security assistance to Ukraine so they can defend themselves. And I would add, one difference from 2014 is Ukraine has spent the last 7 years improving its military, whereas in 2014, the previous president spent 5 years degrading the Ukrainian military.
All good points.
Ambassador Volker and Brigadier General Holt, appreciate your time and insights this evening, and we're going to be continuing to talk about this in days to come. Hope to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right.